Hello everyone! In today's video, we're going to be looking at how to wire a joystick with 4 LEDs, as well as how a joystick works, and how to utilize the button part of the joystick. So to start, connect the top of the joystick to the joystick module if you haven't already done so. A joystick has 5 pins we'll need to wire: ground, 5 volts, X pin, Y pin, and SW, which is short for switch. We're going to start with the more obvious connections, which is that we know our ground pin will need to go to ground and our 5-volt pin will need to go to power. A joystick has 2 axes, an x-axis and a y-axis. The x-axis maps the horizontal movement of the joystick, so how far left or right we've pushed it. And the y-axis does the same, but with how far up or down we've pushed it, so the vertical movement of the joystick. Both of these axes have a range of 0 to 1023, so we'll need to connect them to an analog pin. I'm going to connect the X pin to A0 and the Y pin to A1, but any analog pin would work for this. If you notice on your joystick, when you press down on it, it makes a small clicking noise. And that's because your joystick actually has a push button built inside it. And this is what the SW pin is for. We're using it to read whether or not we're actively pushing down on the joystick. Hopefully you remember from previous lessons that a push button goes to a digital pin, and our joystick's built-in push button is no different. And now I'm just going to wire up 4 LEDs the way that you normally would, with the longer legs going to digital pins and the shorter legs being resisted with 220 or 330 ohm resistors and also going to ground. And one of the other things I'm going to do is just connect both the negative rails of my breadboard with this black wire here, just because based on where my LEDs are placed, it's a bit hard for the resistors to all just reach the one that's closest to me. So now that we've finished physically wiring the joystick, we can go on to actually coding it. The first thing I need to do is just declare all of my LEDs that I set up on pins 3 through 6. So I'm just going to declare all of these as ints and then write them as the pin they are connected to. Then I'm going to declare both my joystick axis pins, so X pin and Y pin, as pin A0 and A1, since those are the pins that I wired them to. I also need to declare my joystick's push button, which is connected to pin 2. Now for the void setup, we're going to declare the pin mode of all of the pins that we just set up above it. So we know for LEDs that we're going to write those as outputs, so I can go ahead and just declare all of my LEDs as outputs. But for my joystick axis, I'm wanting my Arduino to know exactly where that joystick is, and it needs to be reading the joystick. So the joystick axes are actually going to be declared as inputs. And finally, for the joystick's built-in push button, we're actually going to declare it as something called an input pull-up, which is basically putting a built-in resistor into the joystick button, so that way when we're reading it, it's automatically set to high instead of low. And when we push down on the joystick, it actually reads that as low rather than high. So now that we've finished with the void setup, we can actually move on to the void loop. And this is the part where we're actually going to be able to control which one of our LEDs lights up depending on what we're doing with our joystick. So the very first thing we want to do in this void loop is we want to find a way to constantly know where our joystick is, and we want to save that position into a value. So if you remember, we have the X pin and the Y pin, and both of those are separate things that the Arduino has to read. So we're going to set up something called xval, and we're going to set this value equal to an analog reading of X pin And we're going to do the same with yval and set that to an analog reading of ypin. So now we have two values, xval and yval, that will always tell us where the x position and the y position of our joystick is. And when we declare a value inside the void loop, it means that the value of that variable is constantly changing based off of what the Arduino is currently reading. So as I mentioned before, both axes on the joystick have a range from 0 to 1023. So when we're reading how far left or right the joystick is, or what the xval of the joystick currently is, if the joystick is all the way to the left, that value is going to be at 0. And if the joystick is all the way to the right, then that value is going to be at 1023. Using if statements, we can tell our Arduino to make our LEDs light up if it notices we're pushing the joystick all the way to the left or all the way to the right, or just somewhat to the left, somewhat to the right, or in more technical terms, if we're reading a value that's close to 1023, we want the LED on the right to light up. Whereas if we're reading a value close to 0, we want the LED on the left to light up. So starting out with that LED on the right, I'm going to say if xval is greater than 800, digital write my LED that I have on the right to be high, and otherwise digital write it to be low. And now I'm just going to repeat the same formula, but for my LED on the left, which is my red LED. And so I'm going to check if my x value is less than 300, and if so, I want to digital write my red LED to be on or to be high, and if it's not, then I simply want my red LED to turn off. Now for the second part of my void loop, I'm simply going to do the same thing, but with my y value instead of my x value. Now, for the y value, when you push the joystick all the way up towards the top, it goes towards 0, and when you push it all the way down, it goes towards 1023. So I want my LED on the bottom, which is my green LED, to only turn on if my y value is greater than 800, and I want it to turn off if this is not the case. And same thing for the top LED, in which I want it to turn on if my value is less than 300, and turn off otherwise. And for the final part of this void loop, I want to use my joystick button to make it so that when I push down on it, regardless of where my joystick is, all of my LEDs will turn on, and the moment I let go, it'll turn off. So to do this, I can just use a simple digital read statement to see what the current state of my joystick button is, but just remember that we declared the joystick button as an input pull-up instead of an input. So when we press down on the joystick, it's reading that value as high instead of low, because with an input pull-up, these values are reversed. So when I push down on the joystick, or when I'm reading the value of the joystick button as high, I want to digital write all of my LEDs to be high. And then if I don't have this happen, I simply want all of these to be low. And you actually do not need to write an else statement for this part of the code. So now I'm going to go ahead and hit upload. And if I look at my joystick and my LED setup, you can tell that the lights are following the movement of my joystick. And also that when I push down, regardless of where my joystick is, all of them will light up. Since our if statements aren't nested inside each other or anything, It means they can act independently of one another, and we can have more than one light on at the same time. If you're running into some issues with your joystick, I would suggest using this code segment right here and getting rid of everything else inside the void loop. And what this will do is it will basically print out your X and Y value in your serial monitor so you can see if you're reading those values correctly, or if your joystick is just reading those values in a slightly different way and you need to change the numbers you use in your if statements. That's it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching, and let me know if you have any questions in the comments below. Thank you guys so much. Until next time.